20 kilometers above the Pacific Ocean. Year 2200. The sunrise looks different from up here. The clouds are below you, not above. An endless white ocean stretching to every horizon. And floating above this sea of clouds, suspended by technology that makes gravity optional, are the cities. Not small stations. Not experimental habitats. Cities. Real cities. Population 3 million each. Towers that stretch upward into the stratosphere. Gardens that have never touched ground. Entire economies that exist only in the sky. This is where the wealthy live now. Above the weather. Above the pollution. Above the heat. Above the rising seas that have swallowed coastlines and displaced billions. Down below, on the surface, the temperature regularly exceeds 50 degrees Celsius. The coastal cities are half drowned. The interior regions are either desert or perpetual storm. Two-thirds of humanity still lives there, because they have no choice. But up here, in the floating cities, is always 22 degrees. The air is filtered and perfect. The view is literally above it all. And if you have enough money, you never have to touch the ground again. Welcome to Celestia. Population 3.2 million. Altitude 23 kilometers. The largest of the 17 floating metropolises that circle the Earth. You were born here. Your parents were born here. Your grandparents bought their residency when the city first launched in 2147. You have been to the surface exactly twice in your life. School field trips. You remember finding it claustrophobic and hot and strangely heavy. Up here, in the reduced gravity zones, you can jump 3 meters straight up. Athletes play sports that would be impossible on the ground. Architects build structures that would collapse under their own weight at sea level. Children are taller because their spines develop without full gravitational compression. This is not just a city in the sky. This is a new form of human civilization, separated from Earth by altitude and economics, sustained by technology that harvests energy from thin air and manufactures water from humidity and grows food in vertical farms that have never seen soil. The people below call it a symptom, a monument to inequality, proof that the wealthy will quite literally float above the problems they helped create. The people up here call it survival, innovation, the next step, a demonstration of what human engineering can accomplish when resources and necessity align. Both are right, and that is the uncomfortable truth we need to examine. Because the floating cities are not science fiction. The technology already exists. Magnetic levitation, atmospheric ionic propulsion, solar energy concentration, carbon-neutral, closed-loop life support. We could build Celestia today if we devoted the resources. The question is not whether we will build cities in the sky. The question is who will live there and what happens to everyone else. This is the year 2200. The Earth is hotter. The seas are higher. The population is declining, but still immense. And above the clouds, 17 floating cities demonstrate what post-scarcity looks like for the few, while scarcity intensifies for the many. This is not a warning about the future. This is an exploration of the logical endpoint of trends already in motion, where technology, economics, and climate change intersect to create a world that is simultaneously more advanced and more divided than anything in human history. The first floating city was not called Celestia. It was called New Singapore. And it was not designed for luxury. It was designed for survival. 2073. Singapore was drowning. Not metaphorically. Literally. Even with seawalls that cost trillions, even with the most advanced flood management on Earth, the city was losing its battle with the ocean. High tides flooded the financial district. Storm surges overwhelmed the barriers. The government faced a choice: abandon the city or reinvent it. They chose reinvention. The Singapore Atmospheric Development Initiative, a consortium of governments, corporations, and research institutions, goal: prove that a city could exist permanently in the lower stratosphere. Not a space station. Not a temporary habitat. A real city with permanent residents, sustainable infrastructure, and economic viability. The technology existed in pieces. Magnetic levitation had been used for trains for a century. Atmospheric ionic propulsion had been developed for high-altitude drones. Solar concentration technology could harvest energy from sunlight at stratospheric altitudes where clouds never interfered. Closed-loop life support had been perfected on the Mars colonies. What had never been done was integrating these technologies at city scale. New Singapore launched in 2089. Population 20,000. Altitude 12 kilometers. It was designed to be a proof of concept, not a permanent solution. It would float for 10 years, gather data, demonstrate feasibility, and then either be decommissioned or expanded. It has been floating for 111 years. Population now 400,000. And it is still there, still growing, still profitable. Because something unexpected happened. New Singapore did not just prove that floating cities were possible. It proved they were desirable. The air at 12 kilometers is pristine. No ground-level pollution. No pollen. No dust. No pathogens that have not been deliberately filtered. Respiratory diseases dropped to nearly zero. People lived longer. Healthier. The constant mild hypoxia from reduced atmospheric pressure turned out to have unexpected benefits for cardiovascular health. The weather was perfect. Always. Below the city, storms raged. Above it, the stratosphere remained calm. Temperature controlled by altitude and active climate management. No rain unless you wanted it in the designated garden zones. And the view. The view changed everything. Imagine waking up every morning to sunrise above the clouds. Imagine never seeing a cloudy day, because you live above the clouds. Imagine the earth curving away beneath you, a blue marble wrapped in white, with city lights twinkling through gaps in the weather at night. Tourism exploded. The wealthy paid millions for short-term residency. The very wealthy bought permanent apartments. Corporations moved their headquarters. New Singapore had intended to prove floating cities could survive. Instead, it proved they could thrive. Within a decade, 3 more floating cities launched. Shanghai atmospheric, Mumbai elevated, Lagos ascendant, each learning from New Singapore, each larger, each more ambitious. By 2100, there were 9 floating cities. Combined population 8 million. And they were no longer marketed as survival solutions. They were marketed as exclusive communities, the ultimate gated neighborhoods. Membership by invitation and investment only. This is where the story gets complicated. Because the technology that enables floating cities also makes them profoundly inaccessible. Magnetic levitation requires massive superconducting arrays and constant energy input. Ionic propulsion needs rare earth elements. Life support demands sophisticated manufacturing and maintenance. A single floating city costs more to build than most nations' annual budgets. And once built, residency is priced to recoup that investment. The result, floating cities became the ultimate expression of economic stratification. Not just gated communities. Physically elevated communities. Literal upper class. And on the ground, as climate change intensified, as resources became scarcer, as competition increased, the presence of floating cities above became a symbol of what was possible if you had money, of what was unreachable if you did not. Subscribe if you want to explore futures that are uncomfortable but plausible. Because we are about to examine life in Celestia from the inside. The technology, the society, the daily reality of living above the clouds. And then we will look at what this means for everyone else. Celestia is not one structure. It is a constellation of structures held in formation by a distributed magnetic field network. The core platform is 8 kilometers in diameter. Circular. The main surface supports the high-density residential and commercial districts. From above, it looks like a normal city, but cleaner, more organized, all curves and efficiency. Gardens and parks cover 30% of the surface. Water features everywhere because humidity control requires decorative evaporation systems anyway. Extending upward from the core are the towers, residential spires that reach 3, 4, or 5 kilometers into the stratosphere. The higher you live, the more exclusive. At altitude 30 kilometers, pressure drops to 1/10 of sea level. These upper levels are accessed only by pressurized transit, and the penthouses there have transparent floors looking down through clouds to Earth. Extending downward from the core are the industrial modules. Manufacturing, recycling, waste processing, Power generation backup systems. Agricultural platforms growing food in stacked vertical farms. These hang below the main city like roots, mostly hidden from daily view, tended by automated systems and a specialized workforce. The entire structure masses approximately 800 million tons. It does not fly. It levitates. An array of superconducting magnetic coils generates a field that interacts with the Earth's magnetic field, creating lift. This requires constant energy, but at stratospheric altitudes, solar panels operate at peak efficiency every day. Energy storage in superconducting loops means the city can maintain altitude even through the night. Propulsion is gentler. Atmospheric ionic engines generate thrust by ionizing air molecules and accelerating them. This allows Celestia to move slowly, typically following optimal solar exposure and avoiding any developing stratospheric disturbances. The city completes a full circuit around the Earth roughly every 80 days, staying always in daylight, harvesting constant solar energy. Gravity depends on where you are. The core platform uses rotating sections to generate artificial gravity matching Earth's surface. Most residents prefer this, but the towers above and industrial modules below operate at reduced gravity or microgravity. The upper residential zones run at 0.6 G, making movement effortless and life easier on aging bodies. Life support is brutally efficient. The city is a closed system. Water is harvested from atmospheric humidity through condensation arrays. Every drop is recycled endlessly. Waste processing breaks down organic matter and returns nutrients to the agricultural systems. The city produces 94% of its own food in the vertical farms. The remaining 6% is luxury imports lifted up from the surface. The most surprising adaptation is the silence. At 23 kilometers, there are no birds, no insects, no wind you can hear through windows. The city is almost unnaturally quiet. Audio systems pipe in ambient sound in public spaces because total silence makes people uncomfortable. Some residents love it. Others find it eerie. Transportation is three-dimensional. Maglev trains connect different sectors of the core platform, but most movement is vertical. Elevator shafts every 200 meters. In reduced gravity zones, many people simply use powered wingsuits or personal thrusters to navigate between towers. Children grow up with three-dimensional spatial awareness that ground dwellers lack. The economy is post-industrial. Almost everything is automated. Manufacturing is handled by AI and robotics. The jobs that remain are creative, managerial, or highly specialized. Artists, designers, scientists, engineers maintaining the systems, luxury service providers catering to the wealthy, and interestingly, therapists. Because even in paradise, human psychology still struggles. What does daily life look like? You wake in your apartment at altitude 25 kilometers. Floor-to-ceiling windows showing sunrise over the cloudscape. You prepare breakfast from food grown 40 levels below you in farms that have never touched soil. You take an elevator down to the core platform, where gravity gradually increases, and go to work designing atmospheric ionic propulsion systems for the next generation of floating infrastructure. For lunch, you meet friends at a rooftop restaurant. Except rooftop means the top of the core platform with nothing but stratospheric sky above. You watch clouds drift beneath you while eating synthesized salmon that is molecularly identical to wild-caught but has never seen an ocean. After work, you go to the rec zone where 0.3 gravity allows basketball games that look like slow-motion flight. You jump 4 meters for a layup. You glide through the air. It feels like being superhuman. Dinner is at home with your family. Your children were born here and have been to the surface once. They found it oppressively heavy and uncomfortably bright. They prefer the filtered sunlight and reduced gravity of Celestia. They are physically adapted to altitude. Their lungs are more efficient. Their hearts are stronger. If they move to the surface permanently, they would need months of reconditioning. At night, you stand on your balcony and look down at Earth. The lights of surface cities twinkle through gaps in the weather. Somewhere down there, 12 billion people live under climate stress and resource competition. Up here, 3.2 million live in engineered comfort. You do not think about it most days. When you do, you rationalize. The city employs thousands in support roles on the surface. It funds research that benefits everyone. It proves what is possible. You are not the problem. The system is the problem. And you are probably right. But that does not resolve the moral tension. If this vision of the future makes you uncomfortable, leave a like, because the discomfort is the point. We need to think about this now, while it is still avoidable, rather than later when it is inevitable. The surface in 2200 is survivable. Barely. But it is not comfortable. The average global temperature is 4.7 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. This does not sound dramatic, but it has reshaped everything. The tropics are marginally habitable during the day. The temperate zones have become the new tropics. The poles are green and ice-free. Sea level has risen 3.8 meters. Every coastal city on Earth has either been abandoned, armored with massive seawalls, or transformed into a Venice-style canal city. Bangladesh is gone. Most of Florida. The Netherlands survives behind walls that cost more than the entire Dutch economy of 2000. The Pacific Island nations exist only as floating refugee communities. The weather is more violent. Hurricanes that would have been Category 5 in the 21st century are routine. Monsoons bring floods that would have been once-in-a-millennium events. Droughts last years. When it rains, it pours. When it does not rain, the land cracks. Agriculture has moved indoors. Vertical farms, hydroponics, aquaculture. Traditional farming in open fields is possible only in narrow seasonal windows and specific regions. Food is produced industrially and efficiently, but the romance of agriculture is gone. Children on the surface do not grow up seeing farms. They grow up seeing food production facilities. Most of humanity lives in megacities, dense urban centers with populations exceeding 100 million. Lagos, Sao Paulo, Delhi, Beijing, Jakarta. These cities have adapted. Underground levels to escape the heat. Shade structures covering entire neighborhoods. Water recycling so efficient that every drop is reused dozens of times. Life is harder, but it is still life. People still fall in love. Still have families. Still create art and music and literature. Still innovate. The human spirit is remarkably resilient. But everyone on the surface knows the floating cities exist. Everyone can see them sometimes, drifting across the sky like second moons. And everyone knows they cannot go there. Celestia and its siblings have strict immigration policies. Residency requires either enormous wealth or extremely valuable skills. A typical residency permit costs 30 million international credits. The average surface dweller earns 80,000 credits per year. The math is impossible. There are work visas. Technicians, engineers, specialized laborers can get temporary permits to go up, do a job, and return. These are coveted positions. The pay is excellent by surface standards, but it is temporary. You visit paradise, then you come home. The resentment is complex. It is not just that the wealthy live better. It is that they live separately, in a different environment, with different gravity, breathing different air. Their children are physiologically diverging from surface humanity. Give it 5 more generations, and the two populations might not be able to interbreed successfully. Some surface governments have proposed wealth taxes on floating city residents. The cities simply move their registration to international waters and declare themselves independent. Some activists have called for forced redistribution of floating city technology. The cities responded by demonstrating that without highly skilled operators and constant maintenance, a floating city falls. Literally. And 800 million tons falling from 20 kilometers would be catastrophic. There have been attacks. Electromagnetic pulse weapons targeting the levitation systems. Cyber attacks on life support. Missile strikes. All failed. The cities have defense systems. And they have something more valuable, leverage. They manufacture advanced technology. They do cutting-edge research. They hold patents on energy systems the surface needs. They are too valuable to destroy. So a tense equilibrium persists. The surface tolerates the floating cities because they provide technological advancement and employment. The floating cities tolerate the surface because they need raw materials and occasional immigration to maintain genetic diversity. But neither side particularly likes the other. Inside Celestia, surface dwellers are stereotyped as backwards, resource-intensive, environmentally destructive. Inside Lagos, floating city residents are stereotyped as parasites, hoarders, cowards who fled problems instead of solving them. Both stereotypes are wrong and right simultaneously. The residents of Celestia did not personally cause climate change. Most were born after the crisis was already locked in. But they benefit from systems their ancestors built, and they perpetuate those systems. They are not villains, but they are beneficiaries of a profoundly unequal structure. The residents of surface cities did not personally fail to innovate. They are not inferior, but they lack the concentrated resources and freedom from immediate survival pressure that enables the kind of blue-sky research the floating cities pursue. They are not stupid, but they are constrained. This is the core tension. The floating cities represent what humanity could achieve with unlimited resources and freedom from environmental constraints. But that achievement required abandoning billions to face those constraints alone. Is it worth it? From inside Celestia, yes. The city is a marvel. From inside Lagos, no. The city is an obscenity. From a historical perspective, maybe both. The floating cities drive technological advancement that eventually diffuses to the surface. Medical innovations, energy systems, agricultural techniques. The stratospheric research stations study climate dynamics that inform surface adaptation strategies. The floating cities are not purely parasitic, but neither are they altruistic. This is the moral ambiguity of advanced civilizations. Progress for some often requires sacrifice by others. And the people making progress never think of themselves as the villains. The long-term trajectory is unclear, and that is what makes this scenario truly fascinating. Some futurists predict convergence. As technology advances, the cost of floating cities will drop. Eventually, anyone could afford residency. The cities will expand. More will be built. By 2300, perhaps half of humanity lives in the sky. The surface becomes nature preserves and agricultural zones. This is the optimistic scenario. Other futurists predict divergence. The genetic and cultural drift between floating and surface populations accelerates. Within 2 centuries, they are effectively different subspecies. Homo sapiens terrestris and Homo sapiens aerialis. They can technically still interbreed, but they do not. Their environments are too different. Their societies are too different. Humanity branches. This is the speculative scenario. Still other futurists predict collapse. The floating cities are fragile. They depend on complex technology maintained by small teams of specialists. If something critical fails, if expertise is lost, if the energy systems are disrupted, a city falls. 800 million tons at terminal velocity creates a crater measured in kilometers. The death toll is incalculable. One catastrophic failure might make floating cities politically impossible. This is the pessimistic scenario. The most likely future is probably messier than any of these. Some floating cities succeed. Some fail. Some are exclusive. Some become more accessible. Some residents move to the surface. Some surface dwellers move up. The boundary between the two populations is porous but real. Inequality persists but is not absolute. What is certain is that the floating cities change human psychology. When you live above the world, you see it differently. You think about it differently. The surface becomes abstract, a problem to be managed, not a place you inhabit. Children born in Celestia grow up with a fundamentally different relationship to Earth. It is not home. It is that place down there. Beautiful from above. Troubled. Remote. Something you study, not something you experience. This creates a philosophical split. Surface humanity retains connection to the planet. Floating humanity sees itself as post-planetary. Not post-Earth necessarily, but post-ground. They still orbit Earth. They still depend on it. But psychologically, they have detached. This might be preparation. If humanity's long-term future is in space, the floating cities are training wheels. They teach us how to live disconnected from the ground, how to build closed-loop habitats, how to maintain complex life support across generations. The psychological adaptations required for living in Celestia are the same ones required for living in an O'Neill cylinder or a generation ship. From this perspective, the floating cities are not a dead end. They are a transition phase, a stepping stone between terrestrial and spacefaring civilizations. But that transition might take centuries. And during those centuries, the people left behind will suffer. They always do in major civilizational shifts. The question is whether the suffering is justified by the destination. No one can answer that definitively. But we can prepare for the possibility. We can develop the technology. We can think about the ethics. We can plan for a future where some humans live in the sky while others remain on the ground. Because that future is not impossible. It is not even particularly unlikely. The technology exists. The economic incentives exist. The environmental pressures exist. All that is missing is the decision to build. And that decision is being made right now. Not explicitly. Not through some grand global referendum. But through thousands of small choices. Investment in atmospheric engineering. Development of magnetic levitation. Research into closed-loop life support. Each choice brings floating cities closer to reality. By 2200, this could be normal. Children growing up in Celestia, never touching ground, seeing Earth as something beautiful but distant, living in reduced gravity, breathing filtered air, part of a new branch of human civilization. Is this dystopian? Is this utopian? Is it simply different? The answer depends on where you are standing or floating. Here is what we know for certain. The technology to build floating cities exists today. Not in science fiction, not in theoretical physics, in practical engineering. Magnetic levitation can lift massive structures. We use it for trains. We could use it for cities. Solar concentration at stratospheric altitudes provides limitless clean energy. We have tested the systems. They work. Closed-loop life support can sustain human populations indefinitely. The International Space Station proved this decades ago. Mars colonies perfected it. The only barriers are cost and will. And throughout human history, when something becomes possible and desirable, cost and will eventually align. So we will probably build floating cities. Maybe not by 2200. Maybe not with exactly the technology described here. But something like this will happen. The question is what happens next. Do floating cities become exclusive enclaves for the wealthy, entrenching inequality and dividing humanity into those who escape and those who endure? Or do they become technological testbeds that eventually democratize, providing everyone access to climate-optimized living? Do they represent the next step in human evolution, training us for life beyond Earth? Or do they represent moral failure, choosing escape over addressing the root causes of environmental collapse? The uncomfortable truth is they might represent both. Human progress has always been messy. Technologies developed for the few eventually reach the many, but on timescales measured in generations. The wealthy got electricity first, then everyone. The wealthy got antibiotics first, then everyone. The wealthy might get floating cities first, and eventually, perhaps everyone. But eventually is a long time when you are the one waiting on the ground while others float above the clouds. This scenario is designed to provoke thought, not predict with certainty. The specifics will differ. The timeline might shift, but the core dynamics are real. Climate change is making ground-level living harder. Technology is making altitude-level living possible. Economics determines who gets access first. We are building the future right now with the choices we make today. Investment in green technology versus fossil fuels. Research into geoengineering versus emissions reduction. Development of exclusive technologies versus accessible ones. The floating cities of 2200 are not inevitable, but they are possible. And that possibility should inform how we think about inequality, technology, and the future of human civilization. If you live in Celestia, the future looks bright. Clean air, perfect weather, reduced gravity, the best of human engineering. A demonstration of what is possible when resources and expertise align. If you live on the surface, the floating cities are a daily reminder of what could have been. Resources spent on escape instead of repair. Brilliance devoted to luxury instead of solution. the best of human engineering, but only for the few. Both perspectives contain truth, and both should make us uncomfortable. Because the question is not whether we can build cities in the sky. The question is whether we should. And more importantly, if we do, what happens to everyone who remains on the ground? Share this if it makes you think about the future differently. Because the future is not written yet. We are writing it now. With every choice, every investment, every priority. The floating cities of 2200 could be monuments to human ingenuity and optimism. Or they could be monuments to inequality and abandonment. Or they could be both. And the only people who can determine which is us. Right now. In the decades before the decision becomes irreversible. Welcome to Tomorrowborne, where the future is not predicted. It is examined. And we are not here to tell you what will happen. We are here to help you think about what should happen. Because someone has to build the future. It might as well be people who have thought carefully about what they are building. The view from Celestia is spectacular. But before we build it, we should make sure we are okay with what it says about us.